would probably do that where, this would be, instead of 0.033, it would be 0.01667 or something like that. And then each year thereafter, you'd probably add a half to that in year one, then one to that in each successive year. Basically saying Kraft would generate half its cash flows in the first half of the year before June 30th, the other half after June 30th. On balance, they generate their cash flows June 30th of each year. Midpoint convention. This is just a basic assumption they're going to generate it all at the end. All right, I don't want to get too into midpoint at this point. I want to try and keep it simple. Now our discount rate, or our discount factor rather, and the way we're setting up our DCF, it's a derivation of this. The way we calculate a discount factor kind of separates free cash flow from the denominator term. And what we're going to do is multiply each free cash flow by a discount factor. It's the same as saying, instead of this term, we would multiply by 1 divided by 1 plus our rate to the n. The discount factor being this figure here. Okay, so we separate these in banking. I'm not really sure why. It's just kind of convention. But what we'll do is for each year is we'll say equals 1 divided by 1 plus our discount rate, which we're assuming to be 6%, which we got from our WACC analysis before. 1 plus our discount rate, which I'm locking on, raised to the, and the way you raise something to an exponential power, shift 6, get that little hat, a little upside down V character, raised to that period, each year's period remaining. And usually this is expressed in terms of 4 decimal points. So if we expand that out to 4 decimal points, it's not 1.00, it's 0.9981. So in year one, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply 85 by 0.9981. That'll give us the present value of that future free cash flow. We're just taking an interim step here, breaking that free cash flow formula, or that present value formula, down into 2 steps. So each year, multiply free cash flow by the discount factor. If we copy that across, you'll see that each year going out, your discount factor is falling. That's because we're raising each year to a higher and higher power. We're giving less weight to cash flows that are further out because they're more uncertain. As we get out into the future, these cash flows become more uncertain. We want to place smaller amounts of value on that. That is, we're capturing the risks associated with that over time value of money. And based on this, if we want to answer the question, what is the present value of our free cash flows from years 1 through 5? It's simply the sum of these 5 numbers. Present value of our net debt-free cash flows. If you select this entire range, cells E37 to I37, you look down here on the little taskbar, toolbar, whatever you want to call it, gives us a total value of 10.7 billion. Present value of the free cash flows year 1 through 5. Is everyone with me so far? I know there's a lot of steps in DCF. Might seem like it's kind of confusing, but you go through this a couple times and you'll get the hang of it. But what did we say earlier? We said that companies don't just go away after 5 years. So if we multiply 6.9 billion year 5 EBITDA times 9x multiple, it'll give us a terminal value or a value of the company at the end of year 5. We would expect the company to be valued at 62 billion, 62.1. And then if we discount that back to the present, and we're doing that exactly the same way we discounted our cash flows for years 1 through 5. We multiply them each by a discount factor. We do the same thing here. It gives us a present value of our terminal value, 49.1 billion. So what's the value of the company? We showed the present value of our period cash flows, years 1 through 5, 10.7 billion. If we add that to the present value of our terminal value, ends up being about 59 or 58.8 million. The way we typically represent that as bankers is we typically calculate, or we typically present this in the form of a data table. Who's used a data table before? Okay. For some people, this is the first time we're going to see that. For others, it's not, all right? What I just did was hit F9 to recalculate. It was in somewhat of a manual mode here, but that 59.8 billion that I mentioned before, that's where we capture it. That is, we think that most likely our terminal multiple is going to be 9 times, our discount rate is going to be 6%, but in reality, we could be off a little. It could vary between 8 and 10, it could vary between 5 and 7. It could vary even a little wider. All right, this interior range here kind of summarizes what we think is most likely the range of the company. So terminal multiples could actually be between 7 and 11 times, but we think most likely they're going to be between 8 and 10. Discount rate might be between 4 and 8%, but we think most likely it would be between 5 and 7%. And that allows us to speak in terms of a range of values. What we've done as part of our assumptions, we've assumed 2 different things. We've assumed 2 different increments for our terminal multiple and for our discount rate. What we're saying here is for the purposes of our data table, we're going to vary that terminal multiple by 1 times in each direction. So on the high side, it's going to be 1x going to the right, 1x going to the left, reduction to the discount or to the terminal multiple. And we're going to vary our discount rate by 1% in either direction as well. We can tighten this up. That is, we can make assumptions. In other words, instead of saying vary the terminal multiple by 1x going each way, maybe vary it by 0.5x. Vary the discount rate by 0.5 or 0.005, or 0.5%. And now we see that we've got a tighter range of terminal multiples and a tighter range of discount rates. Instead of going 4 to 8, we go 5 to 7. Instead of going 7 to 11 times on the terminal multiple, we go 8 to 10. And as a result of that, our range of values, if I hit F9 to recalc, tightens up a little bit. Now my low end, instead of being 52 billion and change, is now 56. My high end has come down to 63.7. It's provided us a tighter range of value for the client. All right. You would tighten that range as you get more confident in your numbers. Maybe at the start it might be a little bit of a looser range until you understand the industry a little bit better and can feel comfortable that the terminal multiples and the discount rates you're using are indeed accurate and representative of what that company would look like from a valuation standpoint. Conceptually, people follow what I've done so far? I'm going to go into the mechanics in a second, how you create the data table. I'm going to change those increments back to what we had before. And let's talk about how a data table is created. So what I want to do is actually delete this out, and I'm going to recreate this from scratch so you can see how we set this up. That'll give you the opportunity for your homework. Now you'll know how to do this yourself. Most data tables are set up pretty much identical to this. Along the top row, you're going to specify one component of your model that you want to vary. In a DCF, it's typically a terminal multiple. And down the left column, you'll specify another component that you want to vary, typically a discount rate. Most DCFs tend to be most sensitive to changes in your terminal multiple, changes in your discount rate, because those items have such an overwhelming impact on the overall value. Right? Discount rate plays into every calculation we make in a DCF. Terminal value, as we said, usually comprises a good amount of the company's overall value because year 6 to infinity is a much longer time period than year 1 through 5. So most DCFs are most sensitive to these items. Most data tables you see relative to DCF sensitize these two against one another. So typically to set up a data table, it will be set up like this. The skeleton of the data table will be set up like this. But the keystone to any data table is actually going to be in this upper left-hand corner. And if I take away the background coloring of the cell, change it back to white, you see that there's actually a number in that cell. Right? It was colored green, and the font in the cell was green. So it looked like there was nothing there, but there's actually a value there. There actually needs to be a value there, otherwise Excel cannot create a data table. And what you need to put in the upper left-hand corner, otherwise your data table will not work, is the value for which you're trying to solve. And that number should look familiar, 59.8 billion. Remember, that was the number that we saw in the middle of our table a moment ago. That was the enterprise value of the company using a 9 times terminal multiple and a 6% discount rate, basically using our base case, our quote-unquote base case assumptions up above. And if we look at that formula to calculate that 59.8 billion is just the sum of the present value of our period cash flows plus the present value of our terminal value. It's the value of the company. So in layman's terms, what we're saying to Excel is, I want to set up a data table that solves for the value of the company under 5 by 5 or 25 different scenarios. And again, a data table will allow me to run this model without having to create 25 different actual versions of it. It'll go back and plug all these values in, spit out what the result is in total enterprise value terms. Okay, if this is not here, if you're not telling Excel what you're wanting to solve for, you're just going to get errors, because Excel's not going to know what to spit out. So that's the most important cell in a data table. It's the keystone of your data table. You need to make sure that you populate this correctly. And typically, once you get it populated like this, we usually change the cell, the font color to match the background color of the cell, so it quote-unquote disappears, right? The value's still in there. When the client looks at it, there's not some weird number that doesn't have a label associated with it hanging out there in the upper left-hand corner. For formatting purposes, in this case, we change the font color to green and the background to match, so it quote-unquote goes away. Sometimes it'll be white on white, yellow on yellow, green on green, blue on blue, what have you. I'm going to change that back to green, right? And visually it's gone away, but still, if you look up in your formula bar here, you still see that there's something there. There's a formula there. It's that formula that we pointed out earlier, present value of our period cash flows plus present value of the terminal value. It's still there. It's got to be. And once you've set it up, once you've configured your data table to look like this, creating it is actually very easy. What we need to do, the first step at this point, we need to select the entire range of this data table, including the upper left cell. Don't make the mistake of just selecting the interior, these white cells. You've got to select the whole table, including the upper left-hand corner. That allows Excel to see what that upper left-hand corner is. It tells it what it's solving for. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. And once that's selected, the way we create a data table, Alt, D for data, T for table, Alt, D, T, and we should get this nice little pop-up box. And what Excel is doing with this pop-up is it's asking, where in the model, for this row input cell, where in the model do I enter this terminal multiple? That is the items, the assumptions that appear in this row. And where in the model do I input the assumptions that appear in this column, the column input cell? We need to specify to Excel two different cells, one for the row input, one for the column. So once I have that, my row input cell, in this case, is Q31, which is my 9 times terminal multiple. Okay, that range of terminal multiples appears in the row, so I direct it to where the terminal multiples input into the model. My column input cell, my discount rate, needs to be input where my discount rate appears in the model, M22. When I hit OK, and in this case, when I hit OK and then hit F9 to recalculate, now I get 25 different values, one for each different combination of discount rate and terminal multiple. And again, the interpretation of this model is that under our base case is another way of saying our most likely case, where we believe that the terminal multiple will be 9 times, the discount rate will be 6x. Under our base case, which usually always sits in the very center of our model, we think that Kraft is worth $59.8 billion. But again, we think that there could be some room for error. Those terminal multiples may vary a little bit in reality. The discount rates may vary in a little bit. So we think, yes, this is what we think under the base case, but there might be some room for error. We're very confident that the discount or the net present value of the company will range between 52.5, 67.6 billion. Our low and our high of the range. Okay, once you create one, it's pretty easy to do again. Really, the only thing you need to, two things you need to make sure: you've got the value you're solving for in the upper left corner, and when you select your data table, you're including that upper left corner in the range. And then once we have a value, a base case value, now we can calculate what is the distribution of value. That is, how much value comes from the 5 years, the present value of our first 5 years of cash flows, and how much comes from the terminal value. We express that in percentage terms. As I mentioned earlier, terminal value, there's usually an uneven weight associated with it. In this model, it encompasses 82.1% of the total value of the company. That is, 81% of our present value comes from years 6 and beyond. 18%, 17.9% comes from years 1 through 5. Not unusual, not necessarily wrong. Again, year 6 to infinity is a lot longer period of time than year 1 through 5. But when we think of some of the drawbacks of DCF, so much of that number is riding on those out years, that if there was a little change or a little hiccup along the way, either in the company's ability to achieve those operating forecasts, or if we were a little bit off in selecting our terminal multiple, the numbers can change radically. Okay, so that's where we say DCF is very sensitive to potentially small changes in our key inputs. Okay, and then we also do an implied analysis here. If we take a look at what is that enterprise value, that $59.8 billion, as a multiple of our latest 12 months EBITDA, this is kind of a back of the envelope gut check, sanity check. What does that represent as a multiple? 9.5 times. What does it represent as a multiple of next year's EBITDA? 0.2x. We can compare those to how the industry is being valued and say, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable to think that Kraft should be valued as at a